start the stream. I'm video streaming that on a private stream to YouTube, so we can make the talk available later on. I assume that's fine for you.
Absolutely. Actually, this was one of my questions. If you could record it so we could share it with people who could not participate.
I hope everything works fine with the stream. I practiced and I'm still a bit anxious about being my own director on Zoom and giving the talk and managing YouTube. That's too much for an old guy. But I'll do my very best. Oh, I see Ralf is also present. So we have various co-authors of the arc42 books. Hi, Ralf.
Hi.
So if there are any very good questions, I will defer the answers to those guys because they really know what they're doing.
It's great to have them also.
Yeah. Bledar, I give you the make you the master of the timing. Before I forget, I'd like to make you the host of the meeting. That fine for you?
Yes, sure.
So you can, if anybody knocks or whatever happens, you're now the manager.
Great.
So if something fails, I can point to Bledar. Wow, that's great.
Okay, we have quite a few people logging in right now.
Yeah, I see some German names. And I see some names I cannot pronounce.
Yeah, there are some Albanian names, some colleagues and friends. So we're 20 already, but I guess more people will be coming.
Yeah. So you propose to wait some more minutes, or shall we start?
I would say let's wait some more minutes. I know maybe in Germany you're not accustomed to this, but
We are.
in the Balkans this is more or less standard procedure. So let's wait some more minutes, please.
Yeah, no problem. I reserved the whole evening, so I'm not in a hurry. What is the lockdown situation currently in Albania?
So we have a kind of a soft lockdown with minor limitations, apart from wearing the masks in the streets and wherever you enter in shops and so on. But everything closes at 10 o'clock p.m., so it's not particularly hard lockdown. But I heard in Germany you're going to have stronger, let's say, limitations.
Yeah. It's starting tomorrow. It will be a really strict lockdown. So all the shops closed, restaurants, bars closed. Restaurants were closed since November. So that's some time ago. And it didn't work out. So we had to do something else. Some more intense measures. And government decided had to close the schools, kindergartens, and shops. Try to limit contacts as much as possible. So they scheduled it until mid of January approximately. So hopefully it's gonna get better.
Yeah, they're talking here about closing schools actually up to around mid-January. So
Yeah.
Children don't go to schools and so on. But let's see. So I would say let's start at 18:05. Another couple of minutes, and then we could start.
You are the host of the meeting right now, so
Yeah, see
28 right now. Even increasing, that's nice. I really appreciate that interest in a not so very practical topic in the evening.
I think that might be kind of the strong attraction to this topic, because it's one of those that you don't usually see around. You know, talks about architecture and documenting architecture with some kind of standard, so it attracts some interest. So okay, I say we are good to start. I'm also recording the talk on now, so everybody, maybe we can share it with everybody later. So okay, maybe let's start. Thank you everyone for joining. We are going to talk today, as all of you will know, about documenting software architecture. So we as developers do not particularly love documentation. So one of the attracting points, or very attractive points, for arc42 is actually that it promises painless documentation. So let's see how really painless it's going to be. Actually, I have a bit of experience in using arc42 for the systems in the company I work for, so it's been interesting. It's been a bit challenging, and today we have the pleasure of having one of the co-creators of the standard. Hopefully I'm going to say the name right, so it's Gernot Starke, right?
Excellent.
Okay, perfect. But we also have two other people, so we have Michael and Ralph, both of them participating in writing arc42 books. Actually, for everyone participating in the call, in the chats, you can find the link to download for free arc42 by example from Limpub. We thank you, Gernot, very much for that also.
You're most welcome.
So, yeah, I would say without further ado, I will leave the word to you.
Okay, thank you so much. Everybody on YouTube's currently having intro videos, so I try to come up with my own. I'm really pleased I can be here with you. I really like it that you are willing to get treated with a more or less unpractical and unloved topic later in the afternoon or early evening. So thank you for being here. My name is Gernot Starke. I'm a software architect. I have developed software for all my professional career, and I happen to be one of the creators of some architecture thing called arc42, which I would like to discuss with you today. Before we start, I would have really liked to give the talk in Tirana itself. So I like traveling, and actually I couldn't. So I took the freedom of trying at least to travel, and I took a virtual flight from Berlin or from Germany to Tirana. I skipped the boring parts of crossing the Alps and Italy, whatever, and finished one flyover Tirana because I actually had no idea like in our hometown. It's a bit fast, but it looked so interesting to me that I promised myself whenever this Corona stuff is over, I'll come and see you in person. Probably after the talk, it's still valid that I can come to Tirana. Right. Let's jump into the topic. First thing, thanks to Michael, who is present here, and he didn't know that I would show his photograph. He connected the Albanian Java user group and me together, so he made it possible that we can have a nice evening together, that I am able to share my thoughts about architecture and arc42 together with you, Michael. Big thanks. That's very nice. So let's talk about architecture a bit. We reused the term architecture from real life, actually. And when other people say architecture, they usually mean building architecture. So nice houses like that. I used Unsplash, this nice free image platform, to look for Albanian photographs. And I found that really nice, impressive building. It's supposed to be in Tirana. As I've not been there, I cannot verify that. But I really liked that from a design or view point. So it looks great. But what makes up the architecture of that building? So, from my point of view, such an image gives only part of the information the original architects, so the creators, the designers of that building, had in their mind. In the image, for example, we cannot really see what materials are used in the inside of the building. We can see the outside of that building. We can see some nice windows and a huge rectangle left in the middle of the building, so planes can fly through, whatever it's used for. We can guess that, but we don't know that. We cannot see if there is small rooms in the building or large rooms. Is it a conference center or whatever? We simply don't know from the image. And that's a misconception many people have, that it's enough to see the image of something to have enough information about the architecture of such a system. In the context of a building architecture, we don't know anything about the used technology. So how's electricity? Does this building have Ethernet built in or fiber cables built in? How's the heating made? Electrical systems, whatever. So technology is completely missing. Internal structure is missing. We don't know much about the interfaces to the external world. So probably we can see some windows. Yes, a window is some kind of interface, but usually interfaces are not visible. How's the water pumped into the building? How's the water pumped out of the building? And so on. From the image, we don't get any information about any reason of a decision. So why did the architect construct the building in an arc shape? They will surely have had their reasons, but the reasons cannot be deduced just from looking at the picture. That's an observation I share from the building architecture to the software architecture, because in software architectures, I often see one diagram and people say, oh, that's my architecture. And from my personal viewpoint, that's not enough. So, architecture, and then we can come over to software. Architecture is way more than a single diagram. No, even if we compress the diagram and put a lot of information in the diagram, that's rarely or never ever enough. Other people say, oh, the truth is embodied in the source code of the system. Be it Java or C# or .NET, whatever. I'm not sure. No, I am very sure the whole truth is not contained in the source code. I'm sure all of you can imagine situations where you need an explanation for something. So you need to know the reason why things have been made the way they are made. And source code is a very bad location to give reasons for certain decisions, for technology decisions or whatever. So in practice, in reality, we need more than source code and we need more than a diagram. That's how we came up with the idea of having some more in architecture. Now, let's step back a bit. What's the situation in practice? Or at least, what was my situation in practice over the last couple of years? One thing I encountered in reality, in real life, real world organizations, is a kind of shipwreck. So we found some documentation that might have been correct and current many, many years ago. But by now, it's completely rotten. So it's not correct anymore. It's just wasting space. And like this shipwreck in the desert, it's of no use. It probably is interesting for researchers in archaeology or researchers in shipwrecks, but definitely not for developers who want to continue maintaining a system. That was one situation I really disliked. The other one I encountered and I also disliked, I found that in German government organizations, like the Ministry of Finance I worked for a few years. They over-documented everything. So they have tons of documentation. Nobody knows which parts of that huge pile is still current, so is still useful, and which parts have only been constructed to fulfill some standard whatever. So you're lost. Similar to the desert, but it's more than a single shipwreck. It's dozens or literally hundreds of shipwrecks. In case anybody of you has ever encountered the issue of network drives, you probably have seen that in companies. There is a network share and everybody's dumping documents on this network share, which gets fuller and fuller, and the admins add hard drives so to have more space, but the real value of the network drives diminishes because nobody finds anything. No good idea. So the next thing I encountered in practice is overly huge diagrams. I just copied this example from the internet, so this is not from one of my projects. In one project I worked with, or I participated in, we had a document, a diagram printout. Probably currently you have huge monitors and say, oh, nobody needs to print a document. By the time I worked in that project, they printed the diagram. And hold tight to something, the printout was 6 meters. 6 meters long. How can a printer print such a diagram? Yes, there are companies that can print 6-meter diagrams. The height was about 2 meters. They had attached that diagram to the wall of a very big room, and people used to follow the lines on the 6-meter diagram to see what thing is connected to what other thing. That was completely ridiculous because people met in the center and one had to step back and lost his line and had to start over again. Really crazy. This is not what we need in reality. This is probably useful to impress people. This is things we built, it's so huge. No, impressing people is not what we want. We want practical support in day-to-day development of software. Such diagrams are not useful. I like diagrams, but they should be neat and tidy and small. Then they might have a real value. So, architecture cannot be only huge diagrams. That's no good. About 15 years ago, I met with my good friend Peter Ruschka and we compared experiences from our development projects. And we compared that shipwrecks and overly huge documentation, whatever. We came up with the idea of improving that situation by creating some kind of repository for architecturally relevant information. Not everything that can be said about a system, but the relevant information. So relevance, prioritized relevance, was always a topic for us. The first version of arc42 was created from real-world systems. So we took the systems we had, we knew them because we worked on the systems, and we recreated architecture documentation for that systems in brief, small ways to optimize the structure. arc42 nowadays contains 12 parts. That's much, but not too much. And the basic fundamental idea is having a fixed structure. And such fixed structures for interesting things is a very commonly used pattern at everybody's home. You will all have a thing like you see here on the image. Probably you have drawers, probably you have doors to open, but you have a fixed structure on the inside, and within your family, let's call your family the development team for a while, with your family you have some agreement what things to put in what place of this cupboard. For example, you have a fixed place in arc42 for software requirements, for quality requirements, for example, for architecture decisions, for code structure, and so on. So many different interesting things for architecture have their fixed place, their fixed spots in arc42. It looks like that. I won't go over the details right now. I will show you the details a bit later on by giving you a practical, or more or less practical example. arc42 itself is documented quite extensively, and for all these parts you find loads of information, what's contained in it, why it is useful, how is it connected with other parts of the template, and so on. Let's try an overview. I personally like overviews of systems, so I like to give you an overview of how an arc42 architecture documentation could look like. I know in this diagram you see here, I'll increase the size a little, you cannot read anything. That's deliberate. You don't need to read currently. Just look what kinds of information is present, and please look at the top line. This is a real-world system that I helped to build, and it's a 4,000 person day system. 4,000 developer days. It is 20 person years. From my personal point of view, that's a big system. It's a huge piece of software. For such a huge piece of software, we only needed these kind of 15 something pages of architecture documentation. And everybody was happy with this small amount of documentation. So one promise arc42 gives you, you can write compact, concise, small documents, or documentation. If you don't like to write documents, if you like wikis more than documents, then use a wiki. We come to tooling a bit later on. But this is really, in relation to the size of the system, this documentation is really small. Some of you might think, oh, for data migration I'll do only once. I don't need the documentation. That's for the German Ministry of Finance, and in Germany we have some more than a dozen different regions. They had to reuse the system for all the German regions, so for the German states, Bundesländer. So the system was reused over and over again, so they needed architecture documentation, but this amount was enough. So in this document given here, you can see a small number of images, diagrams. On the top right, on the bottom center, you see some diagrams. You see some text and you see some headings. So the relation between diagrams and text, you have more text than diagrams. That's interesting because text is easier to write and edit than documents. Because you can edit text with every editor. For diagrams, you probably need something special. Now, let's move this aside. Let's look at another one. That again is a fairly large system, 2,000 person days, so 10 developer years of effort. That's from the German health insurance. We have this health insurance personal cards given to all the insured persons, and that's one of the system creating this health insurance card, some complicated insurance stuff behind it. We don't need to care about the details. We want to look at the architecture documentation. In this example, you see a lot of tables. So it's not so much text, but more tables. So tabular information. I like tables a lot because they have a very simple structure. They're easy to comprehend. They're quite easy to write with every text processor you can imagine. They are embedded in arc42 at various places. Again, you see some diagrams. The diagrams are small because this is a A4 size paper. So the printout was A4 size paper and the diagrams fit on a single page. Remember, huge diagrams are not useful. Single page diagrams might be useful. And you don't see a lot of text. Such a document, less than 50 pages. So I wrote this documentation in Word, in Microsoft Word. It's probably not fun to write a documentation in Microsoft Word, but even in fairly large systems, it's possible. And I'm still alive, so I survived writing documentation in Word. I will detail a third example with you. I give you an overview here. This overview is a set of slides. This system is an open source system, and if you like, you can read the source code to compare the code to the documentation. I wrote most parts of the code, and I'm a really bad programmer, so the code is not nice, it's not optimized, it's probably not even clean, but the system is working. I created the system to have something I have all the rights on, because the system I do for my clients, I have no rights in, so I'm usually under non-disclosure. I mustn't talk about these systems. That one I can show to everybody, show it to you. Here you see only very, very little text, a few tables and a few diagrams. And I would like to use this example to dive into several sections of arc42 to just give you an overview how that thing might work. Now, it's an open source system to check generated HTML. If you, as developers, document something, the chances are high you're using any tool that can produce HTML output that can be viewed in any browser or smartphone or whatever. And these tools that generate HTML, they do a good job in generating, but probably you as an author, you make some mistakes. You reference images that are not present anymore, you misspell some links or whatever, and this open source tool tries to support you in the sense that it checks the generated HTML. So the business goal of that system, if you want to call it business, so the goal of the system is to support authors writing digital formats. What does it mean? in case you use Markdown, ASCII doc, textile, whatever formats, you want the generated HTML to be checked and verified. This verification or this check is very simple. I want something like a JUnit unit test report for my generated HTML, showing me what kind of mistakes I made, so I can fix them as an author. It's very simple. You don't need to understand the details right now, because I want to show how the system is constructed. For such a simple system, it's a big, configurable, very flexible, extremely flexible link checker. Probably you wouldn't write any documentation at all. I did it to have an example of architecture documentation. Now, one thing I would like to include in architecture documentation is an overview of requirements. An overview, not all the requirements. An overview of very important requirements. In this example, it's a simple table naming a few requirements. They have IDs, so I can reference them in the upcoming sections wherever I want. They have a very small description, and as you see here, it's a table, because tables are easy, are very simple to write, simple to edit, and so on. Another thing I would really like to include in architecture documentation is quality requirements. We don't talk about requirements engineering here. I'm sure you know what quality requirements are. Performance, flexibility, security, correctness, reliability, whatever. There is a huge standard, ISO standard, naming all these different quality topics, and yeah, probably these quality requirements are very fundamental to your architecture. If you want to build a high security system, you will take other architecture decisions than if you want to build a high performance system. And therefore you really need to know these qualities. Very good practice is to include the quality requirements in the architecture documentation. They provide very good reasons for decisions, especially technology decisions. So include quality requirements. These requirements so far are part 1 of arc42. Part 2 is constraints. So what are your constraints you have to comply to? Technologies enforced by your company. Is it a fixed price project? Is it outsourced? Is it nearshore, offshore? Do you have to use some standard software, commercial, off the shelf, whatever? In my case, it's open source, no big constraints. I invented a constraint. It should be implemented on the Java platform, preferably in Groovy. Groovy is not as strict as Java is, and I really like Groovy. If you haven't programmed in Groovy, give it a try. It's really great. Now, the third part of arc42 begins diving into the system. No, actually not into the system, but in the environment of the system. Third part of arc42, the context, shows the external interfaces. The data or events or control flow triggering the system, data flowing in and data flowing out. In our case, it's really simple. We have a user that triggers something. We have a build system, something like Maven, Gradle, whatever, that uses our system. And we have external interfaces to the file system and the internet. That's very simple. In your case, it's way more complicated, but your system as a black box contained here in the third part of arc42, the context. The fourth part, the so-called solution strategy, begins to give interesting facts about the architecture. So what is the underlying technical or structural solution approach? Our solution approach was to use an HTML part. Remember, we are caring about HTML stuff. And one approach would have been, I do all the HTML parsing myself, which is a really big problem. I was lazy, so I used an existing open source HTML parser and made it the platform of the whole system. So this is a solution. You can do it in another way. There are other HTML processors around. I choose a specific one, and this is my solution strategy. Base the whole system on that open source technology. Another strategy was to apply a template method pattern. If you know design patterns, you might recognize template pattern. I deliberately decided against the plugin pattern, which would be very straightforward for many of you, but I decided against it. In an architecture document, you have to explain your decisions, not all the other possible solutions, but your decision and why you did it. Here in the beginning, part 4 is a few pages in the document. I start giving this information about detailed construction, detailed ways of construction. And this template method pattern is one way of achieving the flexibility. That was one of the quality goals mentioned before. I didn't read all the goals, but solution strategy is quite often you name the fundamental technologies you use within your system and give some reasons why you do that. So, part number 5. Now we come to the structure of the source code, which is only one part of architecture. Yes, you definitely need to explain the structure of code. In that case, the code is quite small. So we have some packaging structure with some dependencies. You see here in the image, there is a core and some others. I like on the top level decomposition of my system to recognize business entities. In modern terms, probably you use something like domain-driven design. It would be bounded context on the top level of the building block structure. And if you want more details, you can dive into these on a second level. So what I did, I go back one slide and I increase the slide size once more. You see here the core. And what I do now is I jump into the core. So we call that level 2 building block. You here find some more details. You see how the core in itself is structured. I can explain all these boxes and lines on that level 2. In arc42 we usually use a table for that. I skipped the table here, but I think you can imagine. No, I didn't skip the table. I'm sorry. This table contains some info on the elements of the diagram. This is very typical in arc42. It should be typical in all architecture documents. An image, a diagram should be explained in text or a table. I like tables, I said before. Now, you can drill down even further if you like. You are not required to. Drill as far down to a level of detail you think appropriate for your system. In this case, it's way too detailed. Everybody, at least a bit fluent in Java or Groovy, can read the source code and will understand what's going on. So in real life, I would drill down to a level 3 for huge systems at a few places. In an overview, what we did in the building block view, so part 5 of arc42, we drilled down into the source code structures, starting from the whole system as a black box. So the whole system you see in the top of that tree-like structure here is a black. Actually, the box is green, but I know you know what a black box is. The overall system is a black box in the context, and then we drill down step by step to a level of detail we like. My personal proposal for teams is drill down to level 1 only. So in domain-driven design terminology, give me your context map. all the details only if somebody really requires the details in a diagram. So be very restrictive here in the building block view. Don't draw many diagrams. Give me just one top level overview. We can explain the rest at other sections in arc42 if you like. The building block hierarchy is a statical structure. It explains the structure of your source code. It does not explain how the elements of that structure interact at runtime. I'm sure you all have seen sequence diagrams like that. In a sequence diagram, you show the interaction. You show how building blocks of the static structure interact at runtime. This is part 6 of arc42. So we are halfway through. We have drawn 3 or 4 diagrams and we are halfway through the architecture, and in such a scenario, runtime scenario, I can explain how the system really detects image map errors or whatever scenario I would like to explain. I can do that in the runtime view. I could even do end-to-end scenarios starting from a user and end user interaction, pushing a button on a UI in a system, doing magic things in our core or wherever, and creating some data that's leaving the system through an external interface. That's runtime view. That's dynamic structure of the system. So far, we did not talk about deployment, about infrastructure, about environments where our software is actually executed. Obviously, you have all some development environment, your notebook or your desktop PC where you develop the system, but very often that's not the infrastructure. The overall system is being run. So probably you are deploying to some cloud service, probably you are deploying to some data center, you might have some testing stages, whatever. And information about these environments, about the infrastructure, about CPU, about memory, available memory, about machine sizes, machine characteristics, firewalls, routers, whatever you have in the technical infrastructure is important part of the architecture. As developers, you know why. You need it to debug runtime problems. Now, if you have a runtime problem, somebody writes an error report, it's no good idea to say, oh, it works on my machine. You have to know about the deployment environments, about the infrastructure. That's part 7 of arc42, giving you details of the infrastructure. In our case of that open source system, it's fairly trivial. We have the user's computer where the system is run. The system is deployed from some kind of Maven repo. That's all standard Java stuff. It's not very interesting here, but usually the deployment view in arc42 is 1 or 2 diagrams, again amended by some tabular description of what these boxes are really like, what the arrows mean, what kind of network connections is available, and so on. So that's deployment view. Now part 8 of arc42 is really going down into details. I don't want to go into details of this open source system with you, but everything you need to know as a developer to maintain the system, to fix bugs, to add additional use cases or features to the system. All these details, the reasons why we choose the template methods, whatever pattern. This is interesting for you as developers or a development team. For the future developers joining our team, they probably want to know, why the heck did you do it that way? Have a look at the concepts. We'll explain all the details. I don't want to explain the details of my open source system, but I want to pinpoint the cross-cutting concepts part 8 of arc42 that's the place to go. That's the place to look for detailed information. You might even include source code examples here. As I said, I'm a really bad programmer. I included some source code I have written. You probably spot some optimization potential. Yes, that's nice. Open a pull request in the repo. But I want to talk about documentation here. It's done that way. This is the truth. By the way, in the original documentation of that open source, the source code is included via an ASCII doc include. So it's not copy and paste. It's copy and paste on a PowerPoint. But in the real documentation, it's an include to the original repo. So it's current all the time. Good thing to have. In the concepts, you might give detailed information. In architecture, it's all about decisions. Architects and development teams take decisions all the time. Some of these decisions are more important than others. Some are very fundamental. You have seen decisions in the solution strategy at the beginning, but there are often more. In arc42, there is section number 9, architecture decisions. In arc42, we propose to use architecture decision records, a very well-known structure for decision explanation. I didn't use it on my PowerPoint slides. I recorded some decisions in a table. These decisions from my open source are not important here. It's important to note there is a section dedicated to decisions that are not explained at any other location. So a decision, why did we structure the source code in a specific way? That's a decision from the building block view, from the building block structure. But there might be others you want to explain, you want to keep in the documentation, and section 9 is the location for decisions. And that's it, what I wanted to show you about the structure of arc42 by the example. I suggest, if you think architecture documentation is interesting, might be interesting for you, and you know that your documentation could need some improvement, have a look in the ebook. Bledar will be pasting the link into the meetup description. I will post the link in the YouTube description. If you still have no chance to get the link, ask him personally, write an email to me. I'm most happy to give the link. For the ebook, have a look at the examples in the ebook. They are way better than the one I showed you here. You have probably, you will find many more details. You find examples from various authors having different opinions on arc42. And yeah, that's one place to start. But it's a lot of reading. If you are lazy, like myself, and you probably want to give an overview to a colleague, then head over to the free open source website arc42.org. I copied a few of these statements from the overview. It might be a place to start to get an impression what's contained in the various sections. As I said, arc42 itself is quite heavily documented. No, it's not heavily. There is a lot of documentation available. I hope it's lightweight. It's structured according to the template itself. So if you have any question, what the heck was that runtime view again? Head over docs.arc42.org. It's a free, again, open source website containing loads of tips. I created that slide last Monday. It's 139 by now. This number is a real counter, so if you have additional tips and hints, open a pull request, and we're probably surpassing 140 in the next few weeks. So this website actually has been made for teams using arc42. so they can get some hints and tips how others have done it, how what kind of alternatives are available to explain an external interface, whatever. These are ordered by keywords, so you'll find a way of finding the appropriate information. There is even a frequently asked question site. Again, that one has also more than 130 something questions. The search engine could need some improvement. So if you want to participate in open source projects, we could need somebody that improves the search on the FAQ. But yeah, you're free to use and copy all the content from these sites. That's what I wanted to tell you about the structure of arc42. Now, in practice, you need to do it. Doing it requires some kind of tooling. I don't want to advertise too many specific tools. I've brought one, which is Draw.io, which is a freely available. It's not open source, but it's freely available on all platforms, Linux, Windows, Mac, and it's kind of Visio, but for free. And from my point of view, the usability is better. So if you want to draw small diagrams, it's not modeled, it's diagrams, it's images. Images can be useful. I like Draw.io. It can export in all formats. It writes some XML format. It's a nice handy tool to support architecture documents. I personally like to write documentation in plain text. So AsciiDoc, I think AsciiDoc is better than Markdown because AsciiDoc really has some modularity concepts, so you can write huge documents in AsciiDoc. Markdown is not made for huge documents, so I prefer AsciiDoc to Markdown. I like wikis, so if you have the chance to document your architecture in Confluence, it's perfect. It's multi-user, it's good for business people too. So the subject matter experts, they don't like to write AsciiDoc, but they like to contribute in wikis, so that's nice. Even Word is capable of creating architecture documents. I don't know if you have a love-hate relationship to Microsoft Word. I spent several years creating documentation with it, so it's okay. My favorite, as I said, is AsciiDoc. Why? At first, it has been created for huge documentation, and second, I can write it where I create my source code. Oh, you can write it where you create your source code. This is a screenshot of my favorite IDE, but it works in Atom, in Visual Studio Code, in Eclipse, and in many other development environments. You can write AsciiDoc, you can check the AsciiDoc documentation in your Git or Subversion, whatever you're using, with the same tooling you use for your source code. So this is, at least for you tech guys, it's a very nice and elegant way of creating and maintaining documentation. This is the link I promised. You don't need to write it down from here. We still have the LeanPub book. The content is exactly the same as the very nicely printed packed book, but the packed book, a book we cannot give away for free. We can give away vouchers for the LeanPub, so take that. The content is the same. Yes, I just lost some money because we earn money by selling packed books, but I prefer keeping it open source. That's it from my side. Thank you very much for staying until now. I had no chance to follow the chat. I'll have a look right now. Yeah, the sanity checker is used in Micronaut. I didn't know that. That makes me really proud. Micronaut is such an incredibly cool thing. I know that checker was used when they created JUnit 5, but they dropped it at some point in time because probably they didn't create any HTML errors, but I don't know. Do you have any questions?
Thank you very much, first of all, for all the talk. It was really interesting. One of the things I would like to ask is...
All the videos are out, so I stick to my cam. That's fine.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I would like to ask, how would you suggest, to get started? Because, as I said, I personally have tried to use it also where I work, and a lot of our other people are trying to use it. But, for example, one of the challenges we face is the uniformity of interpreting, various parts in the same way. So there should be some better way to get started.
Yeah, I have some experience in getting started because I was coaching various teams in getting started with arc42, and in the beginning I tried to gather all the people and explaining arc42 based on slides and whatever, and I completely failed. And then I was really frustrated, and a colleague of mine suggested, hey, give them one of your documents. So give them an example, some 30, 50 pages example, no, real life documentation. Just throw it over the wall, tell them, here is an example. You can copy from the example. So give it to them in digital form as a Word document, so you can paste out of that document. And that really turned out to be a good idea. Show the development team an example, a real world example of arc42. That was one of my initial motivations to create the book, to have more examples available. And from my experience, that worked in various organizations for various numerous teams. That worked out quite well because people could look at the example and decide for themselves, do I like what I see here? No, I don't like that. That's way too detailed. And they skip over some pages, come to, for example, Michael's example or Ralph's examples and see, that looks great. I do it exactly that way. And then they have an idea how to proceed. That's easier than to have a blank piece of paper, no idea what to do, having only a theoretical explanation of such a template. So take an example. The optimal thing would be you have an example of your domain within your organization. At first I tried this with the examples in one very, very big German enterprises where I had worked before. So I had an example from exactly that company available, which I could use because it was company internal. I can't use it outside the company, but yeah, that'd be the perfect start. And the second best start is take the book or any other available examples online. You find some and base your own documentation on the structure and the way this example is built, and involve the team. Yeah.
Thank you. Makes sense.
I'd be interested in probably Ralph and Michael's experience, because I know you guys used it. You have any other experience, additional ideas for introducing arc42?
I can answer a couple of that. So one approach in the company I've worked previously on as a full-time employee, was able to just suggest the usage of that documentation, and I did as Gernot just said, came up with a good lead myself. So it's no use to say this is the documentation framework we're going to use and you use that. You need to have some point of crystallization for implementation. Has been my experience, especially as the full-time employee at a company, but also later on as an external consultant. You need some small bits of pieces people can work on and to grow on. and to see if they can actually use it, if they find it useful. And when people find stuff useful, you already will notice that they start to work with it, come up with suggestions, improving it. But I think this is really essential, not to demand the usage of such a tool like arc42, but start with something. That was essential.
I'm completely with you. Yeah, thank you.
The non-play examples I did one on my own. In the open source projects I've been working on, we didn't consider using arc42 actually, but yeah, the other parts that Gernot just suggested, making things that are important to us, like basic architectural decisions, like package structure, actually verifiable through the documentation. This is probably something that get people into such a living document. If they see this is not a dead document, but something that is executable and actually brings benefit. If your build breaks when you don't obey to that what you just defined in your architecture definition, then it suddenly gets interesting. I'd say.
I think it's exactly, Gernot, as you said, because there are so many open examples out there, and your FAQ and everything around in the ecosystem of the arc42 template. It makes it really easy to use it, and compared with other templates where you have in each paragraph some I would say example text which you as a user don't know whether you should just keep it or modify it a little bit. With arc42 you have the help text where you say something about the content, the motivation and the form of the paragraph. This is quite more helpful than all those other templates I've seen before, and that makes it for me easy to use template, and that really helps. If you take a look at those paragraphs, at the help text and those examples, you have a really good start. And I think every time I presented the template through those examples and the help text, people really liked it and started to use it.
Okay, thank you. I had a chance to go over the chat, and I'm not sure if I pronounced the name correctly. Fatjon Gera asked the question about using ERD diagrams when talking about web applications. Where would that go in arc42? And your suggestion using the building block view is valid. Obviously, a structural decomposition like entity relationships might be contained in the building block view, but I suggest, for me, ER diagrams are kind of low-level information. It's quite detailed, and I put it in the building block view some years ago, but then I started moving it away from the building block view over to the concepts. So your concept of how is my data organized, how are my aggregates in my domain contexts are organized. This is fairly lower level. It's more tactical or more detailed engine room information, and I'd like to keep this engine room stuff, this detailed stuff, more in the concepts. You could give some, as I said, some example source code explanation for the diagrams over there, and then keep the building block view quite high level. For example, component structure, subsystem structure, package structure, and so on. You don't need to include all the details over there. But it depends decision. So I've seen people including many details in the building block view, and it might work out. anything else we can help you with? Then?
By the way, Gernot, you mentioned Draw.io, and I think in open source things are going quite fast forward. And as far as I know, Draw.io was renamed to diagrams.net and is now open source, and so it's even easier to use. There is a plugin for Visual Studio Code, and we are also working on a plugin for IntelliJ, which makes it quite easy to handle.
Yeah, I paste the link in the chat. I've read that, I think in your blog post or wherever, but I forgot to include the diagram.net link in my presentation. And the logo is exactly the same, so it looks like it's the same company or the same people.
Yes, it seems that it was some security issue with the IO domain, why they renamed it. And I think we will see this tool more often in the future.
Yeah.
It looks quite promising.
It has replaced, in a few of my clients, it has replaced other commercial Confluence plugins. So people replace their Confluence graphics plugins by Draw.io stuff. So that's...
One other thing that I would mention that has been interesting to notice, I don't know if you're aware, there's a, let's say, an architecture diagram and concept model called the C4 architecture model. And the creator of the model, also in the model's website, state that it's really compatible with arc42, it's actually mentioned there, and they also mentioned a mapping between the various levels of the C4, which are basically 4 levels, and the various levels in the diagrams of arc42. So it's interesting also in that way, and it has also some extra tooling, but it's more of a modeling tool than only a diagramming tool. So it's interesting.
The creator of the C4 model, Simon Brown, is one of my personal heroes in the architecture and architecture documentation space. He has, I think, 4 times the number of Twitter followers than I have. We met on a few occasions, and we always said, oh, we should take 3-4 days, get together in some remote location and document one system with both approaches to really see it in comparison. The mapping given on the C4 sites is not the one I would propose, but I'd like to discuss that with the author, and that has not happened yet. I'm afraid we will postpone that until Corona is over, and but this is really an interesting and very renowned documentation approach, this C4 stuff.
Okay, thank you very much.
Again, thank you very, very much for having me. Michael, thanks again for connecting all of us.
I would like also to thank Michael. It was really interesting, happened really fast, and really, I would say, the ways interaction should be in the industry, in the area we work. So thank you very much to you, Gernot, for the presentation, but also to Michael for making the introduction and making things happen.
Most welcome.
Thanks a lot. And yeah, if there are no more questions, I would say hopefully see you in Tirana, both of you, and everybody else who's